And we're going to try to get both chapters today. Let me remind you what I'm doing here. I understand that Ruth, you've probably heard Ruth preached from the pulpit before. It has a lot of great spiritual content, and I've touched on it in that Ruth is a representative of, she represents us. Boaz is a picture of Jesus. I understand that. You probably do too. And I don't want you to be offended that I'm not mentioning a lot of that in this story. You guys have figured me out. I'm one that just loves to go verse by verse, and not sometimes, like if somebody preaches from Ruth, they hit on the high points and they don't talk about the little things. Like for instance, you notice that last we met, I made a big issue of Naomi and Ruth walking and with Orpah on the road, and then they just stop after walking for a few miles, and they have this big emotional scene, and they're hugging and kissing, and then there's more talk, and then there's more crying. And well, that's not normally talked about. I like talking about those little verses that are in there because it illustrates these people are real. They have real emotions just like you and I. They're not any different. They go through life experiences just like you and I do. And sometimes we kind of gloss through that. And so I just love to jump into the real. I almost like see this as a movie, and I just want to illustrate it that way. And I don't want you to miss the little details. So I'm not trying to gloss over the spiritual importance of who Ruth represents or Boaz represents, but I'm really just wanting to tell the story. I'm a Bible storyteller. That's what I really love to do, go verse by verse. And so I just wanted to mention that before we get started this morning. Quick refresher. I know you know where we're at, but just real quick. We recall that Ruth and Naomi are back in Bethlehem. We know that, just a reminder, that Naomi lost her husband, lost both of her sons. She has two daughter-in-laws. Both of them are initially going to come back to Bethlehem, but then only one does, which is Ruth. And you'll recall that when they come back to Bethlehem, there's kind of a big deal here. Everybody's excited to see Naomi. They're introduced to Ruth. Apparently, Naomi really tells the story about Ruth and who she was, and the fact that she's left her people and left her gods and is converted to Judaism and has completely dedicated to her mother-in-law. And that has really resonated, as you'll see here in this chapter that we're going to be at in chapter 2. It is the people of Bethlehem are extremely impressed with that. So in chapter 2, we pick up with Ruth and Naomi needing provisions. They need food. They need sustenance. They need a way to survive. You'll recall in the last lesson that we taught, I mentioned to you that was about a 10-day trip for Naomi and Ruth to walk from Moab to Bethlehem. By the way, something I didn't mention in our last lesson. The people of Moab, do you all know who they were and where they originated? If you do, say it. It's they were a cursed people, but they had a interesting their past. They came from a particular. Well, they were related to Abraham. But do y'all remember who the mother, you could say, so to speak, and the father of the Moabs were? Just throw it out there if you think you know.
Started with an H. Was that Ishmael?
Well, actually, it's the daughter. It's the daughters of Lot. So after Sodom and Gomorrah, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot and his daughters are in a cave hiding. The daughters of Lot come up with this plan. The older daughter specifically. It's in Genesis, I think 19. And the oldest daughter says, "Hey, there's no men available. We're not going to have any offspring." They come up with this devious plan to get their father drunk. And on the first night, the oldest daughter will lay with him. And on the second night, the youngest will. And so that's what they did. They got him so drunk. The Bible says that Lot was so drunk, he didn't know when he had got laid down or got up or whatever, something like that. He was so out of it. And his daughter both of them had incestuous relationships with him. From that is where we get the Moabites.
Yeah, the older daughter had a son she named Moab, and the other one had a son named Ben-Ami, which is the Ammonites.
There you go, the Ammonites. Exactly right. So anyway, I failed to mention that in our last lesson. That gives you a perspective, and that's kind of one of the reasons they were, the Israelites didn't want to do with the Moabites, and they were not allowed to marry them. And the Moabites did not follow God.
You were mentioning about their walk, their 10-day journey.
Right.
Would they have not had a cart with a tent or
Possible.
something like that?
It's
Did they just
possible.
leave all their possessions behind?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but that makes sense. They would bury it for 10 years. Surely they had accumulated some stuff. And yeah, and so probably they had a donkey and, yeah, that's very possible. Yeah, I can see that. So in chapter 2 of verse 1 of chapter 2, rather, we see that we're introduced. It says that Naomi had a kinsman of her husband. So it's related on her husband's side, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Okay, so don't make more of this than what it is. It's just an introduction. It's so that when we come back to him in a couple verses, we know who it is. And so I'm going to explain why this is important in a minute. So this man Boaz is a wealthy man. Apparently he didn't leave Bethlehem during the famine. And so he probably, when he's a man of wealth, it means that didn't mean he had a lot of currency. It means he probably had a lot of land, a lot of animals, so on. And that's going to be important later. So in verse 2, after the introduction of Boaz, we see that Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after whom, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. Now, notice who initiates this conversation. It's not Naomi, it's Ruth. Ruth is the one that said, mother-in-law, let me go out and get us some food, find a way for us to survive. And so what's interesting is, and I told you this in the last lesson that we taught, that I think on this 10-day walk that Naomi must have educated her daughter-in-law of the ways of the Jewish culture. Remember, she's a Moabite. She doesn't know all the ways of the Jewish culture. She probably doesn't know the 10 Commandments, or she might be familiar with them, but she doesn't know all the feasts. She doesn't know about all the sacrifices. There's a lot of things that you see set up in Leviticus that God had instituted for his people, and Naomi is somewhat educating her. And it's apparent that's what happened, because she's the one asking, let me go out and glean in the field. Now, how would she know that unless Naomi had told her? Because, see, God had set up a plan in Leviticus 19 for his people. It was kind of a welfare plan, if you want to call it that, where people that were needy, or say in this case, a widow whose husband had died and couldn't provide for herself, God had set up a plan with the farmers so that these people could go out and provide for themselves. So what they would do is if you were to pretend like that table is 30 acres, they would just round it off when they glean the wheat or barley, or the barley, the corn, whatever, and leave the corners. And I would imagine in some cases the farmers even left the edges. And so that allowed these needy people to come in, and yes, they'd have to work for it. They'd still have to cut it down and process it to eat it. It wasn't just ready for them. It wasn't like getting cheese and milk like we used to see with welfare, or getting a little debit card, which allows people, and well, I'm not even going to get into that because I get so mad about that debit card thing. I see people buying stuff with that they should not be buying. The welfare system has really been exploited. But God had one set up, and it provided for the needy, and farmers adhered to it. You can read about that in Leviticus 19, 9 and 10, where God had set up this plan. And Ruth is aware of this. She's the one that tells her mother-in-law, hey, let me go take advantage of this. So in verse 3, she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to go to a field that belonged unto Boaz, who is of the kindred of Elimelech. Now, does yours use the word happened?
As it turned out?
Yeah.
Has it turned out or happened? So I think that's interesting. And you might wonder why, and I mentioned in verse 1 that there was just an introduction of Boaz, and that's all it was. Ruth did not know who Boaz was. She had no clue. The verse 1 is for our information, so that we know who Boaz is, so that he's going to be introduced here in verse 3, so now we know whose field she went to. Ruth didn't know. Naomi didn't tell her to go to Ruth's or to Boaz's field. She just happened to go to that field. I think the word happened there is kind of interesting. It's an intriguing word, that she just happened to go to the field of Boaz. If all of us are old enough now where we can look back at our lives in retrospect and we can see a lot of things that quote unquote happened. For instance, I got out of the Marines. I needed a job. It was Christmas time. I knew retailers were hiring. I didn't know what to do with myself at that point. I get a job at Service Merchandise. That just happened to be where I get a job. Okay, well, they liked me. They ended up keeping me after Christmas. It just happened that way. And then I just happened to get transferred to Mobile. Well, in Mobile, I just happened to meet Tommy. All right. And then 35 years later, we're still married. It just happened also that we ended up in Birmingham. I got transferred to Birmingham. And then it just happened after that. I needed a job. Service Merchandise wasn't doing good, and I got a job at UPS. Well, UPS transfers me up here. Okay. This was really, honestly, when I look back at my life, the decision to come to Nashville was really one of the only major decisions that I made. A lot of the decisions that were made prior to 2022 were things that just happened. I really was kind of a victim of the circumstance. I didn't choose to do this. It was, well, you're going to go to this store. You're going to go here. And so me coming up here was like, I told Tommy, it's like, this is one of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my life because I'm choosing to live here. I'm not having someone tell me to go here. I'm choosing. So, and honestly, I feel like it was a great decision. I've not always made really good decisions, but coming here was an exceptional one. I've loved living here. I'm the most content I've ever been in my life. And it makes you feel extra good when you know you made the decision, and of course with the Lord's help. But still, a lot of things just happened in our life. But it's God working the scenes He's behind. He's not just behind the scenes. He's working the scenes He's behind. And there's no accident that she happens on the field of Boaz. And in verse 4, it says, "And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless you." Well, wow, what a great employer this guy is. I've never had anyone at UPS tell me, "Well, the Lord be with you. The Lord bless you on your run today." And I say, "Well, thank you. The Lord bless you as you're managing today." I wish that would happen. I have some devotion time and prayer time before I go into work in the parking lot of UPS. And I just feel oftentimes when I walk out of my car and go through the guard shack to my work, I can just at times feel the evil. And I just pray my way through it. And so I have a prayer partner who we've met since 2002. We've met every Friday until I moved up here. And now we just talk on the phone every Friday morning. And actually I got to last Sunday night go eat with him. But he works for an Christian employer. And oh man, Scott, his employer, is an incredibly godly man. And they have prayer time every morning before they start work. Man, I would love that. That would be so awesome. I don't know that I'll ever have it. So it would be neat to work for a boss like that. And so right away we see the character of Boaz. And then in verse 5, Boaz says unto his servant that was set over the reaper. So this is kind of one of his kind of foreman kind of guys. "Whose damsel is this?" He notices Ruth in the field. Now, being a godly farmer, Boaz adhered to the laws of God that were set up in Leviticus 19, and he did as God instructed. He ensured that there was plenty of crop left over for the needy to come and get out of his barley fields. So he would know who's in his fields. Let's just be honest. Jesus says the poor you have with you always. Have you ever noticed the poor that you have with you always seems to be the same people? It's like they get in this chain, they can't get out of it. And so Boaz would notice certain people in his fields all the time. And so when someone's there that he doesn't know, he recognizes it. Who's that? Whose young damsel is this? So he asks his servant, "Who is this?" And the servant that was set over the reapers said, "Well, it's the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." So she came and continued, even from the morning until now. She only took a little rest in the house. So right away, you see that the workers are very aware of who she is. I think that's interesting. Remember, I told you that when Naomi comes back with Ruth, she introduces who Ruth is, and the story gets out about her. And, through the grapevine in Bethlehem, being a small town, the word gets out. Have you heard about this girl, Ruth? She's a Moabite. She's left everything she had. She's followed her mother-in-law. She's now one of us. She's worshiping our God. It really impressed the people of Bethlehem. Even these farmers, these workers in the farm, they knew who she was. It had really gotten out. And so they not only tell Boaz that, but they mentioned the humility that she has. She said, and I think this would be unusual, by the way, she says, I pray you, let me glean in your fields. Well, any other people that would have come out to the fields would have never asked for that. They would have known it was their right to come out and glean in these fields. That's the way God set up the law. Now, you might say, well, maybe Ruth was just a little intimidated. She had never went to anybody's field before, and she was a little scared about that, just going to someone's field and picking up food that wasn't hers. But either way, it made an impression on these workers that she, with her spirit of humility, she says, I pray you, let me glean after the reapers. And not only that, but it wasn't just her gracious spirit that made an impression on these workers in the farm. They noted to Boaz her diligence, that she was a hard worker. She had come out early in the morning, and she didn't stop. She was a go-getter. She constantly was working, and they make note of that. She only had taken one break, which apparently was something that stood out to them, because maybe even they, as farmers, took more breaks than she did. And maybe the other people that came out and gleaned the fields that were needy took a lot of breaks. But not this woman. She had a work ethic about her that really made an impression on these workers in the farm, in the fields. So then Boaz says in verse 8, he approaches Ruth. He says, Pam, can you read that? Read verses 8 and 9.
Then Boaz said to Ruth, Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink that the young men have drawn.
Right away, you can tell that Ruth has made quite the impression on Boaz. And you also, I don't know if you pick up on this, but the wording in verse 8, and you'll see this mentioned again in later verses. Verse 8 gives us a distinct impression that there's a major age gap between Boaz and you'll notice also that in verse 5, what did he call her? Young one or damsel. So daughter, yes. So, and he even references there's a daughter. So he's, it's like coming up and there's this truck stop I go to in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, because I'm 5 days a week I stop and get a coffee and a Long John with Bavarian cream. It's just part of my habitual routine, and if I don't have it, my day's not as good. And so there's a young lady there. She's so young, and so I always call her a young one. I have a nickname for everybody there. I've got No Jacket Lady, Nice Lady, and Youngin, and then there's Boss Lady. So they all know when I come in there, I have many nicknames. That's just who I am. I'm weird like that. And so I always call this one girl Youngin. What's up, Youngin? she laughs. But that's kind of what Boaz is saying to Ruth here in some respect, but more respectfully than what he's not calling her Youngin. But he bestows quite an honor on her, because he says, listen, don't go to any other fields. You come to my field. Don't go anywhere else. You come every day that you need. And matter of fact, while you're here, if you get thirsty, you go where my workers are. We've got water. You go get water there. That's a pretty big deal. This is a really big deal. And she knows it is, because verse 10 shows that she's completely overwhelmed by his response. In verse 10, she falls on her face and bows herself to the ground and said unto him, Why have I found grace in your eyes, that you should take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger or a foreigner? She knows her place. She knows who she is. I love her response. Her humility is so genuine. But I love that she
Sorry. I didn't bring it with me either.
she understands that this is no accident, that this is not just a man being kind to her. There's a little bit more to this. No doubt Naomi has told her a lot about her faith and how that God will provide. And I think for Ruth, this for her is like, it's a substantiation of the things that her mother-in-law has told her about God. God provides for his people. And when he says this to her, in her mind, I think she realizes, wow, this is way more than I expected. And I think that she knows she's a stranger, she knows she's a foreigner, but she's being treated like she's way more than that. And I think that this is kind of like her first, well, let's just read on further. Boaz had answered and said unto her, It has been fully showed me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and mother, and the land of your nativity, and are come into a people which you knew not. The Lord recompense your work, and full reward be given of you, the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you are come to trust. And she said, Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and you have spoken friendly unto your handmaid, though I not be like one of your handmaids. So we see here that Boaz, it mentions that it says he had been fully showed. How does yours say that in verse 11? Pam, how's yours say that? It has been fully showed unto me, or what? How does yours say it? Verse 11.
All that you have done for your mother-in-law since her death has been fully told to me.
Okay. I actually get, I know that the farm workers had told Boaz who she was. I have the impression that actually Boaz probably knew anyway, because everybody knew, it seems like. If the farmers knew, I think Boaz knew. If the workers knew, then Boaz knew. So I think this just kind of confirmed in his mind. What it did really is it put a face with the story that he had heard. Oh, this is that girl. And he is blown away with just the story and meeting the person behind the story. They match. It makes sense. Because you could hear a story about someone that seems rather spectacular. Wow, this woman left everything she had, comes to a place she's never been before, is forsaked her gods, forsaked her family, and is now with her mother-in-law. But then when you meet someone and it matches the story and they kind of coalesce, it really makes an impression on you. And that there's no doubt that Boaz, when he knew the story and then met her, he was thoroughly impressed. So Boaz, well, we saw the response of Ruth. She's just still overwhelmed, and she can't believe that she's been, instead of being looked at as a servant, she's almost being elevated to a place that she doesn't feel like she deserves. And in verse 14, Boaz even goes further. He says unto her, At mealtime, or in other words, at lunch, come and eat of the bread and dip your morsel in the vinegar or wine, whichever yours says. It was some type of liquid that you dip the bread in that made it a little bit better. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. So you might notice yours might say that a little different, that there was some left over, and that will come into play here in a second. So she did eat until she was completely satisfied, and then she put some in a little piece of cloth or something that she had, or I don't know what she had, but she wrapped it up. And that will come into play here in just a minute. And then in verse 15, when she was risen up to glean, in other words, just time to go back to work. The bell, what is it, the little whistle? That lunchtime's over, go back out and work. And so when they were risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men and said, Hey, let her glean even among the sheaves. Reproach her not. How does yours say that?
Don't embarrass you.
Don't embarrass her, okay. And let also fall some of the handfuls on purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. Okay, let me just stop real quick here before we get to that part. If you think there's a romance blooming here, I don't think it's quite yet. I know we're going to see some romance eventually. I don't think it's yet. And there's a couple of reasons I don't think that. One, the age difference. And we're going to see that come into play in just a second. Right now, I think it's a mutual respect. He is blown away with the character of somebody so young. Hey, we see that today. We see men or young boys and young girls with work ethic that have good characters about them, and they stand out today, don't they? And I think even in that day, even in that day and time, this woman stood head and shoulders above what he was used to seeing. And so there right now, I think, is a mutual respect between the two of them. He sees her as a great young lady that has a tremendous future. And she totally respects him as being a wealthy man, as a man that owns a lot, and has given her attention way beyond what she deserved. And she respects him for that. But then you see that he commands his workers, hey, don't mess with her. You let her get anything she wants. Matter of fact, leave some on purpose near where she's at. Let it drop. This would reduce her workload. So instead of cutting it, all she has to do is just pick it up. She's still got work to do with it later. We'll see that in a minute. But she's out in the hot sun. It's apparent that this girl has really good work ethics. She doesn't stop. So he wants to help her out. Got to appreciate that. Then in verse 7, so she gleaned in the field until it was evening. And then she beats out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. How does yours say that? Ephah. Or does it just say ephah? Okay. So,
26 quarts.
I said,
Okay.
it came to about a bushel of barley. Is what
okay.
it says.
All right. There you go. Gives you a little perspective.
Those were had to look at.
All right. Notice the time of day. That's going to come and play here in a minute. I want you to notice what time of day it is. What time of day do they beat out the barley? So they use the sunlight for as long as they can to be out there to cut the barley down. And then at the evening time is when they separate the wheat from the chaff. They beat it out. Okay, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Excuse me. So in verse 18, after she had beat out her barley, and she has now this bushel that she's taking, she has to make the walk back from the field, which would be in the country, to the city. It's a long day for this young lady. No doubt she had gotten up early and made the walk to the fields, which I don't know what distance they are from the house, but I'm pretty sure from the Bethlehem to the fields is probably a little bit of a walk. Now she's having to walk back with a bushel of barley. She's probably pretty tired. And in verse 18, she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and what she had brought forth, and gave to her what she had reserved after she was sufficed. Okay, there's a reference to, remember when she ate at lunch? She ate her food, and she saved some for her mother-in-law. Isn't she so thoughtful? Such a sweet young lady. And when her mother-in-law saw what she had brought, she said, "Where did you glean today?" And well, mine says, "Where wroughtest you?" How does yours say that?
Where did you glean?
Where did you glean?
Where did you glean? Okay, that sounds a lot easier,
Where
a
did
lot
you
better.
glean?
We don't use the word rot very often. So blessed is he that did take knowledge of you. And she showed her mother-in-law what she had brought or gleaned, and the man's name on whom with I wrought today is Boaz. We're going to get to that in just a second. Well, no, let's read through verse 20. Let's
I
read.
mean, I like, well, not like, but I guess sometimes I can be in Naomi. You know, she comes back and she says, "Call me bitter," you know, "Call me Mara." And then here she said, "Well, blessed be the man who took notice of you." Like, thanks. You know, I mean, there's just that hint of disgust or disappointment or bitterness in the words that Naomi chooses to use.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, she is bitter what God's taken from her.
But I kind of picked up on more of an excitement, though. That's why I tried to read it that way.
Yeah.
I think she was really impressed with what Ruth brought. I don't think she expected Ruth to bring this much. And then not only that, but she's giving her some bread.
Right.
That's like, okay, she wouldn't have that. How would you get that from a field? So I think she's excited. Like, where did you go today that you got all this?
I think she's excited. I think it's not what she expected Ruth to bring back. But it's
I agree.
kind of that tone of, you know.
You picking up on that? Okay. Well, you're a woman, so I'll give that to you. I didn't pick up on that.
I can be a Naomi.
I'm really thinking that she's really excited, and I know she's excited when at the end of verse 19, when she says, "Well, the name of the man's field that I went today was Boaz." I promise you, at that second, Naomi's heart skipped a beat.
Yeah.
I promise you, it did, and because this, if she had any negativity in her voice in verse 19, she did not in verse 20,
Right.
because then she says unto her daughter-in-law. I mean, her whole disposition of her face changes, and her heart is beating. She is excited. She's like, "Do you realize who that is? Blessed be the Lord, who has not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." And Naomi said unto her, "That man is near kin of us. He's one of our next kinsmen." He's like, I love the statement where she says, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." Does yours say that differently? Is it pretty much the same?
Who has
He's
never
not
stopped showing
his
grace.
kindness.
I love that because, okay, if there was negativity, Michelle, in her voice, it changed at that instant.
Yeah.
Because then she knew when Ruth said, "I went to the field of Boaz today," all of a sudden, it's this moment where in your life you realize, hey, God actually notices me. He actually noticed me. Like this wasn't just a happened moment. This was God. God took note of the living me and the dead. He's referring to the family of Elimelech. So this is a eureka moment where she realizes, hey, God hasn't forsaken me. God is here for me. This is no chance, no just luck or coincidence that my daughter-in-law ends up in the field of a relative of ours, but not only a relative, but a man who is a redeemer that can provide a future for us. So that's why I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of things in our life that just happens. And there are, but then when we look back at them from a perspective of now having some age, we know that a lot of it's not just things that just happened. God was working the scenes he's behind, and he still does that. Ruth is so excited, and I think she wants to get in one more thing. I get the impression that in verse 20, she had kind of cut off Ruth. Ruth was wanting to tell her the rest of what happened, and Naomi, when she heard the name Boaz, that was all she needed. Do you realize who that is? And so now Ruth, it says in verse 21, she's trying to continue, and Ruth the Moabitess said, "Well, he also said unto me," in other words, there's more, "You shall keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest." And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maidens, that they meet there, not in any other field." I know your version probably says something different on that. I do not like what the modern versions say on that. They say that no harm come to you. I don't think that's what the writer is saying here. I know all the other versions say that. I'm sorry. I think the old King James has this right. And I'll explain why in a minute. So in verse 23, she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to the end of the barley harvest, of the wheat harvest, and lived with her mother-in-law. Now, Ruth is so excited. She wants to tell her mother-in-law more about, hey, not only did we meet Boaz, and not only did I bring all this home, but he's told me, you stay in my fields and don't go to any other fields. You stay by my workers. And not only that, but he said, stay by my workers till the end of the harvest. Now, we saw in verse 1 that Boaz is a wealthy man. So more than likely, if he's a wealthy man, it means he has a lot of land. So the end of the barley harvest for him would be a while. It could be weeks to get all the barley brought in. And by the way, it's this time of year that they're doing it. So she is going to be out there with him for a few weeks. And the Bible says that she did stay until the end. And I know I made a big issue of that. I don't like the way the wording is of some of these modern versions. The old authorized says in verse 22, you stay in that field with his maidens, that they meet not in any other field. I think they're making a lot of assumptions by saying that it means you would be assaulted. I think really what the writer was trying to insinuate there is that you stay in that field because that's what you need to honor Boaz. Boaz told you to stay in that field. You stay there. You stay with his maidens. You would be like embarrassing Boaz to go to another field. He went out of his way to provide for you, to let you eat with him, to give you water. even make it easier for you to get barley, told his workers to leave some out there for you. Maybe Ruth picked up on that. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. She may not have realized that the workers were leaving it. It doesn't say. But I think her mother-in-law had enough wisdom to say, listen, you stay in that field. You honor this man. And plus, of course, Naomi also knew, more about the Redeemer side, that there was a future here, more than just this picking up barley in a field till the end of the harvest. Naomi was, you'll see. Chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her daughter, my daughter. Michelle, what does yours say after that in verse 1 of chapter 3?
Should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for?
That's a good way to put that. So she's telling her daughter, okay, this has been good for the last few weeks. We're good. But Naomi's the older woman. She understands sometimes young people live for the day. Older people tend to think for the future. This mother-in-law, who's a godly, wise woman, is thinking, all right, I need to take care of my daughter-in-law. Yes, we've had wheat. We've got barley that would last us and sustain us for a while. But my daughter-in-law needs more. So she says, I need to find a place for you. And now in verse 2, she says, and now is not Boaz of our kindred, whose maidens you were? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, put raiment on you, get you down to the floor, but make yourself not known unto the man until you have done eating and drinking. And it shall be when he lies down that you shall mark the place where he lies, and then you shall go in, uncover his feet, lay you down, and he will tell you what you should do. And she said unto her, all that you say unto me, I will do. So here now you see, have any of you ever seen the musical Fiddler on the Roof? Mm-hmm. I love Fiddler on the Roof. I love that musical. Tommy got me into musicals, and and my brothers. I have 5 brothers, and none of them will watch a musical. They think that they have to turn in their man card to watch them. And Tommy, I went with Tommy because you as a husband, she wanted to go, and I went, and I actually found myself. I don't like all of them, but Fiddler on the Roof is a great one. And the movie, The Fiddler on the Roof, that was done in the 70s. Oh my goodness, I go around sometimes singing some of the songs, If I Was a Wealthy Man. But you remember there's a matchmaker. Mm-hmm. Matchmaker, and the little old lady plays the matchmaker. And I thought of her when I thought of Naomi here. She's playing matchmaker.
That's actually kind of the reverse of this one, because they break the promise to Laser Wolf, where Boaz redeems them.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So you know the story, Laser Wolf.
I know the story.
Oh yes, that's a well done movie. Have all of y'all seen Fiddler on the Roof? Oh my goodness, it's good.
It was in Maya's American education, of where I was like, you must see these films to understand America. Fiddler on the Roof is in here.
Really?
I put it in there. I made the list.
That was just a favorite.
Did she like it?
She liked it better than some others. Yeah.
I feel like you throw it in Casablanca.
Les Miserables is another good one.
Oh, she will not watch
Yeah.
Black
Starts
and White.
singing.
Oh man, and I told my brothers. Now listen, you got Russell Crowe in Les Miserables.
No.
He didn't turn in his man card for
I
that.
can't stand that.
I don't like that version.
I like it.
No, but
The Greatest Showman too, though.
Yeah.
yeah, I can sing almost all the songs from those two, and
Yeah.
some from Phantom. Yeah.
Phantom of the Opera. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
4601.
Oh, that's good too. You got that down. Oh, that's really good. Anyway, I digress.
We all do.
He's kind of a matchmaker here. She's playing the matchmaker. She sees that there's more to this here, and and Boaz is a qualified redeemer, and he.
Well, I have a question because we say it's not a romantic thing, or this isn't
It will
necessarily
be.
about romance. But my footnotes now this is my NIV study, and it says that this may seem strange what Naomi suggested, a seductive act. In reality, Naomi was telling Ruth to act in accordance with Israelite custom and law. It was common for a servant to lie at the feet of his master
Yep.
and even share a part of his covering.
I'm getting to that.
But she can't be on the winnowing floor.
Right.
It was a risk. I'm going to get into that a little bit. So this is what she's proposing here is risky. But there was, as your commentary says, there was a law set up where the woman was actually allowed to bring it up to the man. In essence, kind of a proposal, reverse proposal. It was set up by God where this man had a responsibility. Now I'm going to get into that in just a second here. So God was really, it meant a lot to God to keep families going. He didn't like the family line dying. And when Elimelech died, there was a danger of that. And so God made provisions where a story like this could happen. And it's, well, let me get out of that and just go to the story then. And we'll get to the more complicated part of it in just a second. So just go back to the text. So she tells him to go to the field at night, to clean herself up, go to the field at night. They're going to be doing this winnowing as it is. It's just threshing, beating out barley at night. We already talked about that. Remember, Ruth had done it. So now the men are going to be doing it. You might be asking, why are they sleeping in the field at night? Well, remember a few weeks ago when we were in Judges and I told you about Gideon? Remember about Gideon? Where was he threshing his wheat? In a wine press. Why was he doing it in a wine press? Because he was hiding from the Amalekites and other groups that were coming in and stealing all of their crop that they would grow. So what these men were doing and what Boaz would do is they would sleep in the field at night by the crops and the sheaves that they had already harvested because they didn't want people coming in and taking it. So what they would do is the men would sleep, and in this case Boaz, his head would be by the sheaf or the roll of barley there that was already processed. He would sleep at the head. And then if somebody tried to mess with it, he would know. He'd be right, his head would be right by the barley there. So we're still in the period of the Judges here, and that's kind of why this is still happening. It wasn't uncommon for a servant to sleep at the feet of his master. That was typical. You would, and then if the master needed something at night, you were right there to fulfill whatever he needed. It was an act of submission. And so what we need to remember here is, and I know your commentary made some reference to it, there is no sexual connotation to this. There is none. This is nothing to do with, this is not, romance on the threshing floor at midnight. This is nothing like that. Okay? This is purely innocent. We don't need to make more of this than what it really is. Okay? And we see in verse 5 that she said she was going to do what her mother-in-law says. So she goes down to the floor, did all that her mother-in-law said. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down. And at the end of the heap of corn, which is really barley, he covered his feet and she laid down. Now, as we just made reference to, this was a dangerous proposition that Naomi had mentioned. Matter of fact, I found one of the commentaries, it's an old one by Clark. He says of this, he says, on the whole, we must say, had Boaz not been a person of extraordinary piety, prudence, and continuance, this experience might have been fatal to Ruth. We can not easily account for this transaction. Probably Naomi knew more than she revealed to her daughter-in-law. This experiment, however, was dangerous and should in no sense be imitated. And probably this is the only recorded version we have in the Word of God where we see something like this happening. So you see in verse 7, in verse 8, it came to pass at midnight, the man was afraid and turned to himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And in verse 9 he says, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your handmaid. Spread therefore your skirt over my handmaid, for you are near kinsman. And he said, blessed be you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as you followed not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do all that you required, for all the city of my people know that you are a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am a near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto you the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to you, then I will do the part of a kinsman to you. As the Lord liveth, lie down till morning. Now, when he wakes up and he realizes that he has someone at his feet, and then he says, "Who are you?" Because remember, she'd covered herself. And then he hears Ruth's voice, and she says, I am Ruth. And then she tells him, hey, you are a kinsman, and immediately his response, we don't see any pause in the conversation here. We're led to believe as soon as he hears what Ruth had said to her, his response is immediate that, hey, I will do the right thing. I am a near kinsman to you, but there is a nearer kinsman. Okay, so this is where you mentioned, Michelle, the romance. I do think that in these weeks that they had been together, that there was starting to kindle some type of romance because of this comment. He says there is a nearer kinsman. In other words, he's thought this out already. He knows that he is the redeemer for her. By right, he can take her without even her permission. He can take her. It's his right to do so. Matter of fact, some should say he should have already done it, but he hasn't. But you see where he says in verse 10, matter of fact, you want to read that, Michelle, in verse 10? Because it's a little different wording in my
The
Bible.
Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor.
There you go. That is interesting. So it tells you that in the eyes of Boaz, he saw himself to Ruth. How Ruth saw herself to Boaz may have been one thing. But in Boaz's eyes, we're given insight here that Boaz automatically assumed himself not attractive to Ruth because of his age. He knew he was a great deal older than her. And he is impressed. He likes Ruth. There's no doubt about it. He's attracted to her. Not only, we don't see anything mentioned about her beauty, and she may have been pretty. We don't know. But one thing he is impressed about is her character. And that is sometimes an attraction to a man, to see the character of a woman, her personality, just who she is, the depth of her. And Boaz sees that. He's an older man. He's had probably opportunities to marry, but he sees in Ruth something he's not seen before in a female, and he loves it. And so now he says to her, oh yeah, I would have thought you would have went after someone younger, or looked at for someone that was more attractive, or looked for someone that was of wealth or whatever, and she didn't. And so that even makes her more attractive to him. Immediately he says, no, I will redeem you, but there is someone that is more qualified, that is a closer redeemer. And so what he tells her is had to make her heart skip a beat for a couple reasons. You notice that he says, tarry this night. Well, Pam, read that, verse 13.
Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. Okay,
wow, there's a lot right there. So what he's telling her is, listen, you lay down. You're going to be married. You just don't know who to. At this point, now I don't know if she can. He tells her to lay down till morning. Do you think she slept a wink after that? I don't think he did either. I really don't. I don't think either one of them slept. Their hearts are beating. He realizes that she has great affection for him. That means a world to him, because he sees in her a real catch. This is a godly woman, a woman that's left everything that she had, forsook her gods for the Hebrew God, has left everything for her mother-in-law. It shows her character. He's already experienced her humility, the way that she approaches things. He's seen her work ethic. Everything about Ruth impresses him. Everything. She is a perfect woman. She's a 10 out of 10 in his eyes. And now in her eyes, she realizes what he has just said, and she's trying to process this. Okay, I'm going to be married this week, but I don't know to who. And we know who she wants to be married to. And now she has no idea who this other redeemer could be. So then in verse 15, in verse 14, she lay unto his feet until morning, and she rose up before one could know. In other words, she didn't sleep a wink after that. Okay. And he said, let it be known that Pam, how does that say that in yours into verse 14?
Let it be known that the woman came to threshing floor.
Does it say let it not be known?
Mine says.
Mine
don't.
says no one else
Don't
to
let
know.
it
Let it, I'm sorry. Let
Yeah,
it not be
okay,
known.
that's important. And the reason that is, don't think that this is not rendezvous at midnight in the barley harvest. This is only, he's not trying to hide something scandalous. What he's doing is there's a plan. Boaz is a thinker. He knows there's another redeemer. He knows that someone else technically could marry Ruth. He doesn't want anyone marrying Ruth. He wants Ruth for his wife. And he has already, while he was, remember he told lay down and sleep till morning? Well, Boaz didn't sleep either. What Boaz was thinking about is a plan while he's laying there. And you're going to see the plan when we get to chapter 4. He has come up with a plan of how he's going to approach this. It's a little unorthodox, but what he can't have is he can't have any word of what happened that night getting out. It's got to stay on the barley floor or the threshing floor. So in verse 15, he said, bring the veil that you have with you, hold it. And when she did, he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her, and she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, she probably came pretty early in the morning, and her mother-in-law says, who are you? Because it's somebody coming in and disturbing her. And she said, I'm Ruth. And then she tells her everything that had happened that night. And in verse 17, she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave unto me. And he said, go not empty unto your mother-in-law. And then Naomi says to her, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will fall. For this man will not be in rest until he has finished this thing this day. So Naomi knows, based on what happened that night and what Boaz told her, she knew right away, hey, Boaz is going to do the right thing. You just trust Boaz. He's got this. Just sit still, my daughter. I think at this point, you would be safe to assume, you mentioned earlier, that Naomi may have still had some bitterness with God. It's gone now. It is completely gone. Her relationship with God has been 100% restored. Not that God ever left her. She had left God. And now she's in complete faith that God has got this. And in her mind, the little matchmaker's mind, Boaz is going to be the husband. Ruth at this point is probably not sure. Because you notice where Naomi said, sit still, my daughter? I think that's because Ruth said, well, he said that there might be someone else I'm marrying. And that might have been a little disconcerting to Ruth. And so that's why Naomi is saying, easy, baby. It's going to be all right. You know how these older ladies are. It's going to be all right. Just sit down, sit well. Boaz has got this. He's going to take care of it. So I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger. You don't know who she's marrying, but we all do know who she's marrying.
This is where Boaz gets crafty.
Oh, he does. He does. And that's why on that field that night he says, don't let anybody know what happened tonight. This has got to stay. This has got to be silent. I've got a plan, and it is a very unorthodox plan. What a great story.